Hello, my friends, and welcome to this episode of the Brain Body Resilience Podcast. I'm your host, JPB, and today I have a very special guest. I am here with Katie Spada, and I just realized that may not be your last name anymore. But Katie is a registered dietitian, and we're going to talk about all things brain health and nutrition and stress and food and wherever else this conversation takes us. I think these are really important topics that so many of us share concerns over or have had stress about. So before I continue on, I'm going to let Katie introduce herself a little bit and give us a little more detail. Is that still your last name?
So legally, yes.
Okay.
I have not done the full name change yet, but it will be Hilliard.
Okay.
Eventually. But thank you so much for having me today. I'm just so excited to have this conversation. A little bit about me for everyone listening. I've been a registered dietitian for, 7 years now. I got into the field of nutrition because I spent majority of my teens and early 20s as an elite level athlete, and I competed on national teams and in college, and the sport I was in was artistic swimming. Previously known as synchronized swimming. And there's a lot of pressure in all sports, but essentially it's heightened in aesthetic sports to look a certain way. And so I was fighting against my body and food for well over a decade. And I really wanted to learn more about how to nourish my body. My intentions for going into nutrition were to find the secret to stay skinny. And what I actually found was so much more. And so since then I have worked with hundreds of former athletes and share about cultivating a healthy relationship with food and body and how that can really alleviate stress on your body, which we'll talk about today. So it's kind of a little bit about me.
I very much appreciate your honesty in that. Like, look, I really went into this just looking for like the secret fix to just being skinny because that is what I valued. And I'm not going to, I mean, I guess we'll talk about your values, but from what I know about you and the work that I've done with you, it seems that your values are very different now in that area. Yeah. And I very much appreciate your work, and I'll kind of pick your brain a little bit. I don't necessarily like that phrase, but we'll talk later about just what it is now, how you work with people, and kind of your approach to that. Because I know that not everyone, even registered nutritionists or registered dietitians, don't necessarily share the same outlook. And I've heard from people working with someone to adjust their nutrition. And most of the time, people are looking for a way to lose weight. Mm-hmm. And some of the things that I hear, I just really, I'm like, who are you working with? Because they have you like intermittent fasting, cutting out all kinds of different food groups. And it's not sustainable, and it's not going to get you where you want to go. And so working with you and seeing your approach, I'm so grateful that people like you exist out there and are doing this work. So,
Thank you.
So I guess, what is your approach then now?
Very good question. So I guess to kind of dive into my approach, like I believe in whole human health, if that makes sense. But how I define health is different. And I think that's where like a lot of people, there's this convoluted idea of what healthy is for so many. And I would say it's still really strong in the medical system as well. Health is an appearance. It's a number on a scale, for instance. And health can be impacted by numbers in terms of vital signs like blood pressure and cholesterol and blood sugar and all of those. But that's really what my value and my approach to health is. I'm focusing on the health promoting behaviors that are going to impact the vital signs and health numbers that we can look at, from blood work to, blood pressure, to really create a healthy human. And I think the piece that we forget about, especially when we're talking about nutrition and weight and all of that, is the mental health piece of this,
Mm.
because so often people are sacrificing their mental health to chase after what they think is physical health. And they don't realize that during that whole process, their health in general is crumbling. So that's why I really feel so strongly and passionately about it has to be both. We have to have the mental health, and how I look at physical health is different than I think the standard medical system or, kind of nutrition approach would be. So I'm not going to stress about the number on the scale if someone has increased their veggie intake or is now drinking more water or consistently moving their body. Those are markers of health that I look at over, oh, well, you lost 5 pounds or you're down 2% body fat, that sort of a thing.
I I'm just so happy with everything everything you said. Um, I yes, coming from I relate to you in so many ways because I never competed in gymnastics, which is something that now that I'm older makes me really sad. Not because I don't know because I wasn't out there competing, but because I never gave myself the chance to try
Mm.
something I wanted to do because I was too scared of failing. Um, and that has a lot of reflection points as an adult to look back on. Um, but being in gymnastics for, I mean, 10 years or something, it is also an aesthetic sport. And I have had, you know, so many body image issues from the time I was very young. And that was always until very recently in my life, in the last, for sure, the last decade. My goal was always to shrink, to be skinnier, to
Yeah.
find the thing that will keep me skinny. What foods can I not eat? What juice diets can I try? What like
Yeah.
I just and a lot of it was due to my mental health.
Yes.
And so when you say that, that mental health piece, I see a lot of the turning to food. We all like, oh, I'm eating my feelings or comfort food. Comfort food is a very real thing,
Hmm.
and using that as a way to cope with feelings is also a super common coping tool.
Yeah.
And so we have to look at our mental health as a contributor to how we're eating and how
Hmm.
we're viewing food. What does that mean to us? Because it's not just, I think that's also what I really appreciate about your approach is that you consider those things and it's not just like, oh, well, food is just, you know, energy intake, which yes, it is. It also is multifactorial. There's so many pieces. So can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about what what that means to you and what you've seen kind of with people you've worked with?
Yes. There were so many points there that I want to expand on that you said. It's just so much goodness. I think, the first piece in terms of like food is more, I would say food is more than fuel, because in the sports realm, we hear like food is fuel, put good gas in the tank, like all of those kind of messages. And that really distorts how food can impact our lives, because we think, oh, it's simply just energy in order to like put forward work or, do a workout or whatever it is. But food has so much more significance. It can be cultural, it can be an expression of love, it can be an opportunity to connect with people. So food has many roles, and it's important to remember that when we are looking at like our food choices and how we make them. And from like a comfort standpoint, we know that food is comforting. And I use this example of York peppermint patties. And people are like, what's the significance of York peppermint patties? Well, for me, there's a lot, because when I was a kid, my dad, every time we went to the grocery store, he would buy my brother and I a York peppermint patty. And so now if I am like sad or I'm craving some sort of like nostalgia or comfort, like a York peppermint patty serves for more than just like minty chocolate. It's like that feeling of like safety and home. And so one of the things I say is that like having comfort foods or eating emotionally isn't necessarily bad. It's human. It's when that's our,
Yes. Oh
right?
my gosh, yes.
It's when that's our only coping mechanism that we have that can sometimes get us into trouble. Like last night, for example, I was feeling stressed and I was like, I'm just going to have some ice cream. I've reached the point in working through my relationship with food where I had two spoonfuls, literally two spoonfuls of ice cream, and I was like, you know what, I'm good. That's because I know that it's not going to solve the problem. I got a little bit of comfort from it and I was no longer physically hungry, so it wasn't serving me anymore. But a lot of the times when we have sticky and stressful relationships with food, it doesn't end that way. It either ends in eating the whole pint or like never buying it and then, binging later on. So I'm getting off track, but the point there is it's okay for food to be comforting. We just also need to develop other coping skills, which I love the work you do with nervous system hygiene and creating all of that like kind of resilience. And I think being able to pair those skills, knowing that emotional eating isn't necessarily bad, is really important. Um, Another piece that I think is really important to note is when it comes to stress and when it comes to like mental health, blood sugar balance is a very real thing. So a lot of times people think, oh, well, if I like skip breakfast or like I've gone 6 hours without eating, that's good. Let me wait as long as I can go without eating. You mentioned intermittent fasting. That can exacerbate our mental health and exacerbate the stress in our bodies because it's not getting what it needs. Our bodies love staying in homeostasis, fancy buzzword, which is like staying in that really, tight range of temperature and blood sugar and breathing patterns and all oxygen levels and all of this. Blood sugar has a specific range it likes to stay in. And if you're not giving your body enough food consistently to stay in that range, it's going to have to figure out how to do it itself, which means now we're having to dive into, I'm going to go real sciencey on you for a moment, like liver glycogen and like convert that into energy. So now we're artificially boosting your blood sugar. And then when you eat more food, your blood sugar goes even higher. And it just creates this roller coaster of stress of low blood sugar and high blood sugar that can really exacerbate mental health. Whew, I dove deep in there, but I think it's important to know.
Yes, no, I'm here for it. We're here for all of the science nerdiness. I love it so much. I always tell people you don't have to like love all the nerdy stuff as much as I do, but it's important to know. I think that's part of understanding how we work is so important, even just like the basic tiny pieces of that, because then we understand why we're doing something or why we might feel a certain way. And I love that you touched on just the coping skills being okay. They're
Mm-hmm.
not, and we like to vilify just like everything we do, and like just like all natural human functions are like, well, that's bad. It's not. We are always seeking comfort and seeking that balance and homeostatic state you said.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether it is reaching for something, sweet or salty or something that makes you feel good, or, just sitting in front of the TV and staring at something for a little bit, or whatever it is, some coping skills are are not as useful because they are more detrimental.
Yeah.
But like you said, they are useful as long as they are not the only thing that we have, because then it's not actually addressing the issue that we're having. And it's like a band-aid. Like, I'm gonna use this thing right now and it is useful, and there's still something underlying that I need to address a little bit. So I really appreciate that you brought that up.
Yeah.
And what you're going into how digestion nutrition works on a kind of a mechanical level. This is why the basics work. And
Yes.
this is something that I'm interested to know kind of how because I talk a lot about keeping it simple, having these practical tools, and nutrition is one of the most important factors to managing our stress, because of how our body responds to not having enough of something. So if we're having a balanced diet and we're eating to fuel our brain, we're eating our leafy greens, we're eating our micronutrients, we're
Yes.
eating enough protein, we're eating enough carbs because our brain is made of fat. It, creates protein. It needs
Yes.
carbs for energy. All these things, these pieces of these whole like groups of food that we're told like these are bad, you can't have them, is like what we need to
Yes.
like sustain in a balanced way. And so in that way, it is really simple to kind of just like move your body and eat some real food. But we live in such an unnatural way. I think societally we have these really strange ideas about how to get to this kind of more natural space in a
Mhm.
very like roundabout way, both more like hacks and tips and tricks. And if we were just kind of paying attention to the basics, I don't think there would be such a need for all of those workarounds and whatever else we have out there promising us like a way to just get back to what is more natural. um so how do you convince people, or I guess not convince, I'm not in the business of convincing, I don't like that, but how do you help people to understand that the basics really are the thing that are going to be the most useful, and that doing some of like the all the crazy diets and all the restrictions and all of that is not as useful?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think the really the key there is understanding like why. So oftentimes we have to kind of rebuild why people are choosing to engage in diets or do juice cleanses or intermittent fast, whatever it is. And oftentimes it is because they're dissatisfied with their body. They think that they need to be losing weight, or something that I say is like the desire to lose weight is, unfortunately, I won't say like normal, but it's very common in our society because that is the society that we live in. It's constantly telling us that we need to be in smaller bodies. It's focused on a thin aesthetic. Um, and so to have the desire to lose weight isn't necessarily bad. It's how we're acting on that desire that can negatively impact our health. So in order to get to the foundations, we have to kind of reassess like, well, why? What is your goal here? And it's like, well, I just really want to be thin. Why? What do you think is going to happen when you're in a thinner body? And kind of build off of that. And eventually we get to this point where it's like, okay, I really just want, like, I just want to be healthy. Okay, well, what does health look like for you? And then that's when we can really lay that foundation. Like, okay, for you, being healthy is having energy throughout the whole day. Let's create your foundations that way. For you, you want to be able to chase your kid when you're, 50, 60, 70 years old, your grandkids, whatever it is. Like, okay, let's talk about nutrition foundations for that. So it's nuanced, and like I hate it, but I love it that like it depends, because it always does depend. From like a very basic nutrition foundation, it's going to be the same for everyone. Consistent meals, carbs, fats, and proteins. Um, you know, but how we get there and how we build that into your life is what's going to be individualized and look different. So, I feel like a lot of people will say like, okay, but I just want to lose like 5 more pounds, or I just want to, whatever it is, like, and it's okay if I do this juice cleanse. And then we negate the negative impacts of that. So that's why creating those solid foundations, so when those thoughts and those feelings do come up, because they will, the society we live in, it's inevitable, um, can really create that strong foundation for moving forward.
Yes. I love everything you said just just now. There's so much in there. And I think again we as humans we like to um put things into boxes. We like, our brain works well with binary, so it's like, oh, it's good or it's bad.
Yeah.
And it's not. And I appreciate that you touched on that, because having aesthetic goals is okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. It is the why behind it, and that is where a lot of that work, because we see this, surface goal of, I want to lose 5 pounds,
Mm-hmm.
or I want to look a certain way. And then, like you said, when you start digging into why, what does that mean to you? What does that look like to you?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the time it comes down to, and I'm kind of speaking for people that I have worked with in my own experience.
Yeah.
Um, but it is more a foundation of, what is my self-image? What is my self-esteem? How do I view myself? And if I don't look this certain way, I am not, I feel like I'm seeking to feel a certain way with
Mm-hmm.
this goal.
Yes.
And looking a certain way is not going to make you feel a certain way,
No.
especially if I've done, oh my goodness, I've done like 14-day juice cleanses where I drank nothing but fresh pressed juice for 14 days or whatever. I remember at one point I was like 20. I was going through a divorce, and somebody was like, "Oh, you look really great." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I've just been living on depression and diet pills." And they were like, "Oh, well, you look good."
Yeah.
I'm like, I was a child, and I was telling you that I was not okay, and you're like, "Oh yeah, but you look great." and
Yes.
and so, like, ultimately, that look that you think is going to make you feel better is not what's going to make you feel better. It's
Mm-hmm.
how you get there, and the journey to that, and the changes that you make in yourself, and how you feel about yourself, and how you view these things, and like you said, the reason why you're doing these things evolves when you take care of yourself and make that the goal.
Yes.
And so I think
Yes.
that's a really important kind of distinction, that like there's nothing, it's not a bad thing to have aesthetic goals, but why and how.
Exactly. Exactly. I feel like a lot of the work I often do with my clients is value alignment. So, are the actions that you're taking currently in alignment with like your values and your morals and like your belief system? And how that relates to nutrition, you might be like, it's food, it's not that serious. But sometimes when you are chasing after losing weight or whatever it is, and now you're not eating enough, so you're hangry and you're snapping at your husband or your wife or your significant other, and then you're avoiding social situations, or you're saying no to this because you don't like the way you look, whatever it is, oftentimes those pieces can negatively impact the values that we hold. Like a client I have right now, one of her values is being able to be present with her wife when they go out to dinner. And that's something that we've been working on because her desire to want to lose weight has clouded that, and it's negatively impacted her ability to be present and engage in those things that are important to her. So that's where it's like meshing the two, like, yes, recognizing that wanting to look a certain way is likely just kind of a byproduct of living in the society that we do. Um, but we also need to make sure that we're balancing it out with the value alignment, that with the values that you have in your life and that they're lining up. Um, so it can get a lot more complicated than just like, well, yes, an apple over a donut. Like, no, it's it's actually not that simple. Um, and in addition to that, having those foundations that are more simplistic can really allow you to build off of it.
Yes, I love that you mentioned your client. So many of the people I work with, their body image is such a huge reason for their internal stress. When we go through,
Yeah.
our initial kind of, what's going on, why are you here with me? What are we hoping to get done? That is such a common issue that people are having. Is, I'm so stressed out. I used to be in better shape, and I just, like, it's all, the body image is a huge source of that stress. I just did a post on Instagram, I'd mentioned before we started recording, and it
Yeah.
was just about things that we don't have time for. And there's so much we get caught up in, just all of these, just the ridiculous daily things of life and sometimes forget what is really important. And we let these things consume our attention and time, and we just don't have time for it. And one of them is, hating your body.
Yeah.
And that part of the post was shared so many times. So many people were like, yes. Because I know I was going to say as women, but I know that everyone has struggles with body and living in certain bodies and what that looks like.
Yeah.
But I think that, as people living in a culture that tells us you have to look a certain way to be valuable,
Mm-hmm.
or you are somehow like morally wrong, or you're doing the wrong things in life if you don't look a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
that brings so much of that internal stress, that shame and that guilt and all of that that makes us want to reach for something quick, like, how do I fix this? How do I fix myself? How do I not be wrong? And
Yep.
that's so much of the work that I do, is getting out of a space of in that threat state, because I think I'm wrong. Like,
Yes.
you're not wrong. There's nothing wrong with you. You don't need to fix anything except maybe the relationship that we have to these things. But it's not a you issue. There's so many levels. It is a societal issue. It is a lack of education
Yeah.
on even what, like, I I am very grateful to have the education I do around food.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that was intentional in my when I got my personal training certificate and my nutrition coaching. It was also just learning for myself, because I have been in such a poor space. Like you said, you were seeking this way to, like, but how do I stay skinny?
Yeah.
And that's what, but again, what I learned also was like, oh, okay, there's so much more to this, and this is all actually not, there's no quick fix. There's no 10-day cleanse that's going to do this. And I've gone off on a whole tangent now, but I really appreciated that,
Yeah.
touching on that internal stress, and that idea that people have about themselves affects so much of their life in all aspects. And then when we're not getting the proper nutrition, we not only have the internal stress from the shame and the guilt and the stories that we're telling ourselves, but there is that physiological stress from the lack of proper nutrition to sustain and for your brain to function, for your body to work right.
Yes. Yes. No, I agree with everything, and I appreciate the tangent because I think something that's so important to recognize is that, like, your body image has a lot less to do with your physical body and a lot more to do with your relation to your body. And so, like, people think changing your physical body is what's going to change your body image, but it's actually the other way around. We have to change the relationship with our body to change our body image. And body image is something that's so fluid too. Like, you could wake up one morning and be like, I feel great in my body. And then the next morning you're like, I absolutely hate my body. And your body physically doesn't change that much overnight. Like, yes, it's changing every day, but not that much. Um, and so I think remembering that is helpful because our feelings about our body are valid. Like, you are allowed to feel however you want about your body, but that doesn't always make the feelings, like what you're saying about your body, true.
Yes.
Um,
Oh my gosh. And I just am laughing because I've been going through a lot of that recently.
yeah.
My I have a better relationship with my body than I ever have, and I have such an appreciation. I think as I understand the complexity of what my body actually does and how hard it's working just to, like, keep me alive and moving in this world, I think about it very differently. But I still wake up some days and I'm like, oh, I feel really good. And then some days I'm like, why do I not like all of these things? And it's a day apart. And my husband's like, literally nothing changed. You were just talking about how good you felt yesterday. And I'm like, I
Yeah.
know. And I know that, like, but today I do not feel the same way. And I think that's so important, that yes, your feelings are valid always. Feel them,
Yes.
and press pause, take a moment to create a little space and recognize that, like, okay, I do feel this way and it may not be entirely true.
Yes, yes. And it's so hard because like I still feel that way. Like sometimes I'll wake up and I'll be like, I feel great in my body. And then the next day I'm just like, oh, I just feel terrible in my body. And like how you feel, like you said, it's always valid, but that doesn't make it true. And I think remembering, like, for me, I'm a very like logic science based person.
Mm-hmm.
So to know the science that my body did not physically change that much overnight sometimes helps bring a little bit of appeasement, to how I'm feeling, a little calm to how I'm feeling. But I think the other thing to remember too is that like the diet industry really capitalizes on that, right? Like you mentioned the juice cleanses and intermittent fasting and like all of these things, they are they are actually set up, talking about like our self-worth and how we feel about ourselves. They are set up to have you fail and to make you believe that you're the reason it failed. And so oftentimes when people are trying to chase nutrition and food and diets and body image, it worsens how they feel about themselves because they're like, oh, well, I can't even make it 30 days for Whole 30. I can't even do this. I can't even do that. And it is set up from a business perspective so smart to make you feel like you're the problem and then you need to keep going back to them. But from a human standpoint, it's terrible because it's keeping you trapped in feeling like you're the problem and you need to be fixed. So,
Yes. And that's why I appreciate your work so much, is because you do have a human centered idea of what it is. And that is my value as well. And that is not the value generally in our society. We are
yeah.
very business and money oriented over, human needs. And it is, and knowing the science pieces, again, knowing how you work helps you navigate what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is so important, because it is, and it's easy for me to forget because I kind of, in this social media sphere, I work with a lot of other practitioners. And so, like, the people that I'm paying a lot of attention to, um, know these things and they are science based. And
Yeah.
so then I go elsewhere. I talk to whoever else outside of that small little echo chamber that I have, and people just have the wildest ideas of what food means or what nutrition is or how to get there. And I'm really grateful that I'm a little bit further removed with my own experience from that, and then it doesn't take very long to remember, like, oh yeah, there are really wild ideas out here about what health is. Like, my excuse me, my mother-in-law, we were just having this conversation. um, she she will just go to the store and she's like, but it says it's healthy.
Yeah.
This thing says it's healthy. We're like, but it's not. That's not even real food. Like, that's, and when I say that, I am not like, oh, eat all organic or all whatever. Like, that's not it. Not everyone has access to that, and that, I think, is another thing I want to touch on as a dietitian. Your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think, the again, the very intentional marketing on these foods that are like, this is healthy, and I'm like, that's a cookie. Or like eat it, it tastes good, but
Right.
know what it is.
Exactly. No, I mean, you bring up such an important point when it comes to like access. And I kind of think about it like like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We can apply that to food too. The base is like you need to have enough food, period. The end. Like, I don't really care where you get it from as long as it's enough food to give your body energy and fuel for the day. Then we can kind of step it up and be like, okay, well, like what does it look like from like a macronutrient breakdown? Can we look at like how many carbs, how many fats, how many proteins are you eating to make sure that we're giving your body enough of those? Then we can move up to even like the types. Okay, well, what types of carbs and what types of proteins and what types of fat? And we can keep building to micronutrients, all the way down to like if supplementation is necessary. But from the basics, like we need enough food. And there is such a dire situation. Like I did my internship in Detroit, which is a food desert. And we talked about food deserts and, people often get shamed for grabbing convenience foods or packaged foods at the gas station, whatever it is. But if that's all you have access to, like, we need to address the first need, which is enough food, period, the end, before we can even start talking about, like, well, what about organic raspberries versus, non-organic? So, that's not to say that, like, we can't eventually talk about that, but I think we do need to have that realistic view of, like, most people, first of all, most people in the United States aren't getting enough fruits and veggies anyways. And so I don't care if it's frozen, I don't care if it's canned, fresh, organic, non-organic. Like, I just want people to eat more fruits and vegetables in general. But I think that's an important piece to look at here when we are making food recommendations. There's such an elitism aspect to the health and wellness space that it really can negatively impact how people view, like, oh, well, I only have money to buy, like, frozen broccoli. I can't get the, like, julienne fresh organic, whatever. Like, frozen broccoli is great. Buy frozen broccoli. So yeah, there's so many, like, levels to that, but oftentimes I'll talk to people and they'll be like, oh, but it's so expensive to eat healthy. And I'll be like, well, let's back up and redefine what does healthy eating look like, and then be able to pick foods that are, air quotes, healthy based on your means and what's available to you.
Yes. And like you said, there's so many layers to that, because immediately I think about, like, what neighborhoods, in what neighborhoods are they building a Whole Foods?
Uh-huh.
In whose neighborhoods are they building 5 liquor stores and a convenience store?
Mm-hmm.
And in more white, affluent neighborhoods, you are going to have more access to quote unquote health food, or even just whole foods. And I just mean fruits and vegetables and grains, and not just fast food or convenience store foods. And that is an issue. And until we address that, and not just the classism there, but the racism and the structure of how we build our cities,
Mm-hmm.
that is going to continue to be an issue.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And so, that's where, like, when there's a lot of food shaming that goes on, and especially, like, if we're talking bringing the body image piece back in, there's a lot of food shaming for people who live in larger bodies. Oh, like, they shouldn't be eating, a cheeseburger, but you see someone in a thin body and you don't think anything of it, right? It's important to remember too that, like, we don't know what their access to food is. And, people say, like, oh, well, like, they should just go buy, like, fruits and vegetables or whatever it is. From a calorie per, like, penny perspective, fast food is going to be more energy dense, and you're going to get more calories for what you're consuming. And again, going back to that hierarchy of nutrition needs, like, that's the basics. You need energy. And so I do think that there's a lot of food shaming that adds to stress. And people get stuck kind of, like, in that rabbit hole. They can't get out because they're, like, shaming themselves for the food they're choosing. People are shaming them. And then it just creates a very unsuccessful environment for cultivating true health, which is choosing the foods that are most accessible to you, that are going to support your health in the best way possible. And yeah, there's just so much that bothers me in that space. And I think, again, there's a lot of rhetoric, and same thing on the social media channels that I'm a part of. There's a lot of, like, very, oh gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? Elite just keeps coming to my mind, like, kind of like elite wellness culture that shames other kind of access that people have, and it just keeps us stuck where we're at, in my opinion.
Yes, absolutely. And I appreciate as you're saying all of these things, what comes to my mind is that if you are shaming someone else, you feel that shame. If you're happy with your life, you don't need to go pick on someone else. And so these people who are in their, elite, inaccessible, faux wellness spaces that are shaming other people for what they're doing, they're not actually content with what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And I think that is more of an issue than what whatever you're trying to project on someone else.
Yeah.
Um, I just don't have, I have no patience for shame, for shaming others. It's just not, and we do so much of it.
Yes. It's so interesting because as a dietitian, I think my food choices are always judged. No matter which food choice it is, I can walk into a party and grab a slice of pizza and people will be like, "Oh, the dietitian's getting pizza?" Like, "Oh my gosh," right? Or I can go out to dinner and order a salad and they're like, "Well, of course you're getting a salad. You're a dietitian." And there's constant it's just a constant reminder that like there is so much judgment associated with people's food choices, and that creates stress. Like, I don't know about you, but there have been plenty of times I've gone out to dinner with groups of people and I've been stressed about what I'm going to choose, not because of what I want to eat, but because, oh, well, are people going to think like, oh, if I order the burger, like, what are people going to think? And
Yes.
that's where I just feel like we do need to cultivate that trust in our own food choices to where like we know without a shadow of a doubt, like what we want and what our bodies need that day, that you can order the burger and be fine with it. Or you can order the salad and not feel like, it was pressured into making that decision. So food shame is very real. And, one thing I'll say is like, as a dietitian, like I'm never going to judge anyone's food choices. That's not my place. And I think that there's just a lot of judgment around food. And I wish there wasn't so much.
And that, yes, so much of that and how we judge food in itself. To, like you said, if I get the hamburger, and I've had that so many times, just thinking like, oh, if I eat a second piece of this, are they gonna like think, I, because I'm the fat girl, and then they're gonna judge me for that, or what? This whole narrative that I have. Nobody else is probably even paying attention to me. If they are, they probably have their own things around food that they need to deal with, like I was just talking about.
Yeah.
But we start to, tell these stories in our head about what it means, and it's because we have these ideas about what food means.
Yeah.
Again, I think you have just done a really great job throughout this conversation of just like, I don't, food is necessary first, just that you have enough,
Yeah.
and then we can start to look at whatever else. And if you have certain goals, performance goals, aesthetic goals, whatever else, yes, it will need to adjust. What you
Hmm.
need will be different.
Yep.
But there aren't good foods or bad foods. Foods don't have like a moral, like they're just food. It's just something. And we do have so much um so much judgment placed on what type, if it's good, if it's bad, if it's okay, if it's just, it is just a thing. It is such a strange, if we replace those ideas with just like, I'm looking out my window, there's all kinds of trees, I'm like, that tree's bad. Don't
Yes.
hang out with that tree. Like, that tree's good. It just, like, it sounds so ridiculous.
We do attach so much morality to food, and then when it comes to like a stress perspective, we are so stressed to make those food choices. I always say like the stress associated with food choices is more unhealthy than any food choice you make.
Yes,
um,
absolutely.
and one of the things that I'll often work on with clients is like really detaching that morality with food. And it is so challenging because again, from like a societal perspective, there's a lot of influence on how we view foods. Green juice is good, but drinking a soda is bad when both of them have sugar. It's like we create this convoluted idea of what is good and what is bad. And so one of the things that I probably have too much fun doing it, but one of the things I love doing is, if anybody has seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding, when the dad is like, give me a word, any word, I'll tell you how it's related to Greek. I love doing that with food. Give me a word, give me a food, any food, and I will tell you how it can serve your body. Because all food can provide your body with some sort of nutrition. And if we take away the good and the bad, and we just recognize that some foods have more micronutrients, some foods have more macronutrients, some foods have more, it doesn't make them good or bad. It allows you to approach food choices in a more neutral way and actually ask yourself, like, okay, I'm going into a long meeting. I know I'm going to need to be full for a while. I know I'm going to need some brain power. So let me pick some carbs, but I also need to pair it with protein and fat to keep me full for longer. It's not a good or a bad choice. It's just a neutral choice. When you're able to approach food that way, oh, it becomes so much easier. I wish everyone could approach food that way. It's just so much nicer.
Yes. And like you said, I think that something important too is that we get so stressed out about how we view food too, because I think that's more of a conversation now than I have ever realized that it was, or maybe it has ever been, the relationship we have to that. But then
Yeah.
it's like, well, why can't I fix my relationship to this? It's like we all are socialized in a certain way depending on our environment. And so
Yep.
as an individual choosing to step outside of that socialization and say like, okay, I'm going to assess this and think critically, and does this align with my values? Does this make sense to me? Is really, really difficult, as opposed to just like going with like, oh yeah, this is what everybody says and thinks it does. So I think that's a piece as well. And I really appreciate, as you were talking, I was reminded of, you did a reel on Instagram one time, and you were talking about eating peanut butter.
Yeah.
And I was so grateful for that, because things like the peanut butter is so vilified. I eat a
Oh,
lot of peanut butter, and you were like, why is peanut butter? Let's do that. What's good about
yeah.
peanut butter?
Oh my gosh, there's so many good things about peanut butter. First of all, since it's a nut, it's going to be higher in those um, unsaturated fats, which we know are protective for our heart, which we know help to keep us fuller for longer. And then the other big thing is the micronutrient absorption. We can actually absorb micronutrients better when we consume fats, and peanut butter has fat in it. I think the biggest thing I remember from this one was I talked about vitamin E. And fun fact, vitamin E, it's like tocopherols. That's the actual word. So the whole like don't eat foods that you can't pronounce, like it's just vitamin E. Eat whatever foods, whatever words, you want. But vitamin E is actually it's an antioxidant. And so kind of looping it back to brain health, we know that consuming more antioxidants can help us with reducing our free radical oxidation that happens in our body, which is usually linked to things like cancer and chronic diseases. And I think there's even a link now to like progressing with dementia and Alzheimer's and all of that. So if you're consuming more vitamin E, for more vitamin A, more vitamin C in whatever foods you want, it's going to help with reducing this stress of, free radical oxidation in your body. When we reduce that, we immediately boost our health. And so by eating peanut butter, you are consuming these unsaturated fats, which have heart protective benefits. You're consuming more vitamin E, which is going to be an antioxidant, help reduce the stress on your cells, help reduce free radical oxidation. There are so many benefits to a spoonful of peanut butter, and yet peanut butter is viewed as bad because it's high in calories and fat. So there's so many other
Yes.
things that it's beneficial for. And so I love being able to do that, like to break it down, because we do kind of show how there doesn't need to be a morality attachment to it. And I had so much peanut butter for breakfast this morning too. I eat peanut butter all the time. And then there's the kind of question of like, well, which peanut butter? Does it have to be all natural, unsalted? Or like, what if it has an oil added to it? What about this? I always say like, buy the peanut butter that fits within your budget, and also the peanut butter that tastes good and you'll actually eat.
Yeah, I see there. I've seen people like grinding their own peanuts in the store to make like that. I mean, I'm like, no judgment. There's judgment. I'm like, what are you doing? But also, if that's what you want to do, that's amazing. For
Yes.
me, that seems ridiculous. I don't have the time or energy or desire to do that. I'm just going to
No.
go buy whatever the peanut butter is that, fits my needs. But I
Yeah.
just, I don't know why that sticks out. I'm just like ridiculous things I've seen on the internet that are like, whatever this challenge, no peanut butter, no carbs, no this, no that, no that. And so and I'm like, but I love peanut butter. And I
Yeah.
just really love, yes, knowing like, actually, these are the good things that it does for you.
Yeah.
And so you can eat
You
it.
can eat it. I I had someone ask me the other day, like, well, what peanut butter do you use? Because there's so many, and like, there's, what about seed oils and this and that? And I was like, I just buy the 2-pack of Skippy from Costco because everyone in my household will eat it. It's inexpensive. It meets our needs, and like, it's still health promoting. And we could get into the whole topic of like the poison is in the dose, right? Like it's dose dependent. When people are like, oh, well, you can't eat too much of this or you can't eat too much of that. That goes for everything. Like water can kill you. If you consume too much of it, if you consume too little of it, water can kill you. And yet we don't approach water with this fear that
Yes.
it is something that could actually kill you, like we do with other foods, like seed oils and sweeteners and all of that. So there's a lot to be said for having that neutral approach to food.
I think it's also really interesting that point you bring up about like these things can kill you. I think about the way that we grow food here, the things that we put in our food here.
Yeah.
Our food in the United States is literally banned in other countries because of some of the things that we use and the health costs. And that's not as much of a factor as, well, it's going to kill you because you're fat.
Right.
And it's not because of the food, it's because we live in a fat phobic society. Like
Yes.
There's less concern for actual death than there is for gaining weight. Which just there's something wrong. There's so many things wrong with that.
See, I totally agree with you. And I have so many theories about this, but one of my theories is, we're like, well, why does the United States have so much like heart disease and chronic conditions and, all of this? And we point to the general, like, I don't like BMI, but for the purpose of this, like the growing BMI of society, right? Like for the most part, it says like our society is living in larger bodies. And that's why we're having all of these issues. I disagree with that. I actually think that the reason we're having all of these chronic issues is because of the increase in stress. And I think stress is one of the biggest reasons that we're seeing this epidemic of chronic conditions. And there was actually, a study that looked at the different BMIs, which BMI was never meant to indicate health. And we took it and ran with it in a negative way. And it was only done on white men. So it's not really applicable to gender or nationality or race. Anyways, besides the point, coming back to my point, there was this study that was done and it looked at the different BMIs and which one had the highest risk for mortality. And it was the two extreme ends. So like underweight and like the extreme side on the on the overweight perspective. But the group that actually had the lowest risk of mortality was not the air quotes normal BMI. It was actually the next level of first overweight category. So this one had the lowest risk for death, lowest amount of chronic conditions. And my point there isn't the numbers or the BMI, but it's that we have this idea that a thinner body is a healthier body. And yet we also have all this research that goes completely against that. So why are we chasing this? I got off onto a tangent. But
No, I appreciate all of that. And I think to answer that, the reason we chase it is because facts don't hold as much weight as feelings. And we are made to feel like shit about how we look. We are made to feel that we are not good enough for all of these things, all the things we talked about earlier. And so how we feel, again, like you said, the marketing is brilliant because it gets into your self-worth and your feelings. And so having these studies that are like, actually, this is all made up. We all just made this up.
Yeah.
And people are like, yeah, but I still feel like crap.
Right.
And so I'm still, looking for a way to fix that. And I'm so grateful that you touched on the stress. And yes, that is our most significant problem. If we look at the rate of death through cardiovascular disease, that is one of our highest. That is a stress-related illness. It has more to do with stress and the physiological effects of stress on the way that your breath works, the way that your cardiovascular system works, than the food. And certain foods can be a contributor to that in the way that, digestion and the acidity of the food and how that affects the physiological response. Yes. again, what is it, how much,
Mm-hmm.
amount, access, all of those things are all factors. And again, like we talked about, it's not, there's so much nuance. It's not one way or another. It never is when we're talking about humans.
Right.
And with that, we also see then the risks of, you know, uh, death by suicide is one of our major killers. We
Yes.
have millions and millions of people on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications, and I'm not in any way anti-medication, but if those things to fix a problem, we wouldn't have that problem.
Yep.
And those are hugely contributed to by high levels of stress. And so the major factors of death and illness that we're looking at in our country are stress related issues.
Yeah.
And that's why I do what I do. And I'm so grateful to have you here and be in contact with other just brilliant people and practitioners on across, the human spectrum, because it is all intertwined, it's all related. We are not actually, they're not separate boxes like we have been told, like this piece of, nutrition's over here and fitness is kind of related, but then stress doesn't have anything to do with it. And then there's this other thing. No, we are whole humans, and all
Yes.
of these pieces, all of these factors interact and
Yep.
create our health.
Yep. I could not agree with you more. I think we do silo things like, oh, well, I'll just silo my nutrition and silo my fitness and silo my stress, when they are all interconnected. And I have lived, I would say, for the majority of the last decade, a very stressed human. And so that's something that I've been working on from my own health, is like reducing the, you know, how stress impacts me. Because you said something in one of our conversations that like you can't avoid stress, and like stress isn't necessarily like bad, but it's like how it impacts and like how you like what do you do about it, essentially. And so like I think that when we were talking about health, nutrition, exercise, whatever it is, like we have to bring that piece in,
Yeah.
because it is a whole human approach. And if you're only focusing on one or two of them and you're missing this third piece, like you're missing it.
Yeah. And it is all of the pieces are needed. And again, yes, it is not, we can't avoid stress. It's just like the nutrition. It's your relationship to it. How do we choose to approach it, and why? What's the
Yes.
purpose? Are we just trying to get rid of it, just like we're trying to shrink our bodies? Because then that is not going to be as useful. We're not going to actually get where we need to be, where we want to be, and feel how we want to feel. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing with all of the trying to reduce the stress, trying to like ourselves better, trying to, um, lose weight or get stronger or eat better. We're trying to achieve a feeling.
Yeah.
And so we
Exactly.
have to we have to consider why we're doing it if we want to reach that feeling.
Mm, yes. I completely agree with you. And I think that's why, like, if I ever work with anybody, the question I ask more often than not is, well, why? Why do you want that? Why do you feel that way? Why do you think that's the solution? Um, and that is what really drives us to like health. I think we all want to live long, healthy, enjoyable lives. Um, so how can our actions align with that goal in an enjoyable way? It's got to be enjoyable. So,
Yes. Because it's not sustainable. If you're just trying to do something you hate the whole time, you're like, this sucks, I don't like it, you're
yeah,
not going to continue doing it. And why should you? Why would you? It doesn't make sense.
right, right. No,
Yeah.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Our food
I
choices. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, our food choices, our movement choices, our relationship to our body, they can all serve to elevate our living experience, um, instead of hinder it or burden it. And so that's really kind of my goal as a dietitian, is to help people feel like food choices, movement patterns, their relationship to their body. It elevates their living experience.
I love that. And I am looking at the time and I think that is such a wonderful place to wrap this up. I just that is a beautiful way to summarize all of this. Do you have I always ask if there's anything else that you want to leave the people with? And I know that for some people they're like, no, I've said everything. And that's great too.
I feel like we really have covered just like a whole wide variety of topics today, and I just appreciate you creating this space to have these conversations. I guess the only thing that I would want to say is, like, meet yourself where you're at. Where you're at is different than where someone else is at. And so if it's not like green juices and yoga every day, like, that's okay. Look at your life, your circumstances, and see how you can, what I just said, like, elevate your living experience with what you have. And that's going to be the best first step.
Yes. And that is where we need to go out, because just because somebody else did it does not mean it's going to be what's best for you, because we are all different humans with different needs and different spaces. And so that's beautiful. Where can people find you if they want to come learn more about your content and listen to the things you have to say?
Yeah. I am over on Instagram at fueling.former.athletes. And then I have a blog at spadastrongnutrition.com as well, with a whole bunch of good information there. So those would be the two best places to find me if you want to learn more.
I love it. I will link both of those in the show notes so you can find those. To everyone listening, thank you so much for being here. You know that I am immensely grateful for your time and attention, our two most incredible resources, and I am grateful you choose to spend them here with us. For now, we're going to say goodbye and we'll do this again. Until then, peace out.
Thanks so much.